FF14, as an MMO with a decade-plus long life cycle, has a very storied history, not just in the hundreds of hours-long main story, nor in the slew of high-end battles that have tested its most committed players to their very limitations, but within the community that plays it. The people. There have been countless silly, intriguing, and downright unbelievable tales woven by the players, with the content, the developers, and, of course, with themselves. Today is one of those stories. This is the story of how a small oversight in the launch of a brand new expansion would inadvertently cause a catastrophic server error that would leave tens of thousands of players utterly unable to progress at all, leading to apologies from the development team and Naoki Yoshida, and of how, in the midst of it all, the player base made the best of the situation by queuing up politely and waiting their turn. This is the story of Ral Barn Savage. Before we hop into the story, if you enjoy deep dives into FF14's past and community, please do consider subscribing, it means a lot to me. A Realm Reborn into Heavensward was a big success for Square Enix. The initial 1.0 release of the game had been such a catastrophic failure, in amongst other high budget and continually delayed money sinks. And the result was that if the corporation didn't find some kind of home run win soon, it was likely that they would have to shutter entirely. Luckily, that proved to be exactly what happened. 2.0 taking the good that already existed and drawing heavily from other influences in the MMO space, such as World of Warcraft, built a game that drew eyes, and more importantly felt like home to many. Throughout the following 2 years, the player base flourished and grew consistently, and soon enough, Heavensward, the first mainline expansion, came as well. This took the game's story as well as its critical and commercial success to an entirely new level. It was here that it felt like FF14 was really starting to gain steam for the first time and draw the attention of the wider market. The next few years saw play rates increase patch on patch once again, despite a couple of setbacks along the way. It seemed that the future was bright. All eyes were firmly placed on the upcoming 4.0 expansion release, Stormblood, to see where the future of a rejuvenated Final Fantasy MMO would take them as it stepped out into center stage. This new expansion was set to be a massive paradigm shift for the game, with every single job receiving significant revamps and the introduction of their own job gauges, which would signify a new era of gameplay, alongside the addition of brand new jobs Red Mage and Samurai. The budget was substantially higher as well, and Square Enix's plan was to make their new battles more cinematic than ever before, with the hopes of competing with the high fidelity generation of gaming that was well and truly in the limelight. Solo duties too would be expanded, in the hopes of building them into these exciting cinematic moments that would become high points of the main story experience. The intent was to capture this entirely new market up for grabs, and assimilate them into the rapidly growing player base that was already present. The job action trailer, media tour, and sequence of live letters promoting the expansion were received very positively, and the future seemed bright for the release of Stormblood, which was scheduled for June 20th, 2017. In anticipation of these increased players hammering the servers, additional steps were taken to ensure a smooth experience all round. Transfers to congested servers, including Balmung, Gilgamesh, and Chocobo, were suspended, and incentives were provided to help nudge users towards less popular hubs. Over on the European data center, an entirely new world was set to be added alongside the expansion, named Omega to ease congestion. Queues would be added to ensure that whilst wait times might exist, those that were logged in should have a great time. The plan was solid, and the development team felt very confident about the upcoming release. Expansion launches are tumultuous times, and it's absolutely essential that the player experience be as smooth as possible. server hiccups, unplanned maintenance, and lag were an unacceptable result that could cause their newfound users to plummet. Everything needed to go well. Launch day came around for early access players, June 16th, and everything seemed like it was going absolutely fantastic. The new leveling zones were vibrant, the job updates were well received as the first levels came and went, and the story was an immersive continuation of the liberation of Alamigo plotline that many had been waiting to see for such a long time. By the time players were reaching the 8th main scenario quest, Best Served with Cold Steel, they would get a taste of the effort the team had invested into building these new and improved solo duties. Some chose to unlock the new jobs first instead, both of which also started a quest leading into solo instanced duties. And it was there that the problems truly began. You see, the servers themselves were holding up well. The queues to actually get into the game itself were bearable and fair, and more importantly trackable. Even as they climbed into the thousands, people at least knew where they stood. There was absolutely stress, though it was manageable. But Square Enix had made one disastrous oversight. They had not anticipated the fact that all of their player base, all at once, was barreling straight towards their instance servers to access either a solo MSQ duty or a job quest duty, and they did not have the means to support them at the same time at all. The system inevitably would fail, and when it did, all hell would break loose. Upon reaching the NPC for one of the solo duties and clicking on them, for the vast majority of players, upon watching or skipping the cutscene, an error message would play instead. A system error occurred during event movement, it would say, kicking them back into the open world as if the solo duty had never been initiated in the first place. For those lucky few that made it past that point and actually managed to launch the solo duty itself, their struggles were not necessarily over, because the instance servers were desperately crammed past their capacity and being constantly spammed by thousands of players trying to get into them. They were dreadfully unstable. At any moment, the player could lag out and disconnect, logging them out and forcing them to sit through a player queue that would last anywhere between 30 minutes and upwards of 2 hours. Then, when they finally made it back inside, they would be, you guessed it, right back in front of Ral Barn or their job quest NPC, and have to begin the entire process all over again. It quickly started being referred to colloquially as Ral Barn Savage. To make this whole situation even funnier, those players that were blessed enough to make it through Ral Barn Savage would be faced with another solo instance duty shortly afterwards, this time triggered by talking to Pippin. This became dubbed Pippin Extreme by those defeated at its hands. There was no consistent way to make it through, and with no official word from Square Enix as the hours of early access slowly rolled by, this conglomeration of FF14 players excited to play the new expansion, and frustrated at being stonewalled by this unexpected event, had to find their own way to deal with it. Some would find a way to fill the time, anticipating a quick fix. They would do what they could, working on leveling their crafters and gatherers to the new level cap of 70, either utilising old recipes or those gathering nodes available in the very first Stormblood zone. Another subset would create a fearsome fate train in the fringes across every server, all at once. This was by far the fastest way to train combat jobs past level 60, considering that Duty Finder servers had also been negatively affected by the current incident and were far more unstable than usual. Those that liked to gamble, or those who had given in to their frustration in equal measure, would congregate around Ral Barn and spam him repeatedly, hoping that they would catch their big break sooner rather than later and be able to progress. I myself, admittedly, was in this camp. Over time, users began to succumb to their inner Brits and do the only thing that they felt they could in order to apply some level of fairness to proceedings. They started to queue, and one by one, newcomers would see this forming line, and in most cases would do the dutiful thing and walk to the back of it, waiting their turn. The hope was that if everyone participated, the stress on the instance servers would reduce, and each individual would have to wait a roughly equal amount of time before their turn came and they broke through the wall, rather than RNG dictating their fate. As afternoon of the 16th turned into evening, on practically every live server you could head over to this very spot and find an orderly line running back as far as the eye could see. It became an opportunity to make something positive out of the situation, as Warriors of Light began to talk, joke, and interact with one another as they waited their turn together, creating hulking trains of matching mounts or swapping stories. It had an atmosphere very reminiscent of being around the bonfire at summer camp. Some, however, didn't have such a positive attitude, using this impromptu community movement as an excuse to attempt to police other players who wanted to instead continue trying their luck at Ral Barn Savage by spamming, instead of waiting their turn. Tensions rose, and at various points arguments broke out. At times, the sheer number of players inhabiting that single zone would cause an entire server to crash momentarily, plummeting all back into the login queue. This entire debacle overshadowed the expansion launch itself, becoming the main point of discussion on internet message boards during the first day of early access. It was covered extensively by FF14 YouTubers at the time. It was clear that Square Enix needed to take decisive action and deliver a statement as soon as possible, before the bubbling controversy boiled over. Late that evening, that very statement came in the form of a post from Naoki Yoshida on the Lodestone. In it, little was provided in the way of answers, aside from an acknowledgement that the instance servers were limited due to server congestion, and it was the only way at present to ensure that more widespread server crashes didn't take place. He apologised and noted that the team would require more time to produce a proper fix. The next day, another post would go live stating that the development team had made changes so that as many players as possible could be moved to instanced areas, allowing them to partially unplug the cork that was holding the progression of so many in place. This, however, had caused unexpected server stability issues, resulting in some going down entirely, and that as a result, logins would be limited. Queues would end up being a little longer as a result of this, reaching upwards of 5,000 at times, but it would begin to provide a glimpse of long-term game stability once more. By June 20th, another post appeared on the Lodestone, and by this point, many had broken through Ral Barn Savage and were able to proceed with Stormblood as normal. 30-minute AFK disconnects were implemented to ensure that users wouldn't overstay their welcome to attempt to avoid the queues if they weren't actively playing. And that was the end of that. As an aside, I was there for the launch of Stormblood. In fact, I had taken a week off to enjoy early access and the launch, and as a direct result, I was there as the instance servers collapsed and players began to vent their confusion and frustration in shout chat and subsequently begin to queue up in their lines. I was fortunate and broke through the wall in just over an hour, with the added boon of not being kept back on Pippin Extreme at all, and in short order I was able to move on to the Ruby Sea and leave the pack, as well as the madness, firmly in the dust. One thing that I'll remember to this day very clearly was how empty the place was. How, as I explored and quested in the zone, I barely saw a single other person. It felt like the zone belonged to me. For the day of an expansion release, it was strange, lonely, a privilege to have broken through, yeah, But I too was walled by the sheer lack of players that were even capable of queuing into those level 63 duties, and had to stop for the day. Ral Barn Savage wasn't the only game-breaking bug that came alongside 4.0's release though. There were a few others equally as egregious and hilarious, if not more so. One in particular that I want to highlight in this video because it was so memorable was linked to emotes. You see, Stormblood was the first time swimming was added to FF14, and with it came certain swimming-specific emotes. Alongside that, and seemingly unrelatedly, they made it so that if a player is doing a persistent emote when they enter an instance or duty, when they finish the duty and exit, they would still be in the same spot, automatically doing that persistent emote. These two things individually were lovely features and quality of life, but seemingly when combined, they unleashed hell within the game code, unbeknownst to the development team. With the Pool of Tribute, aka Susano normal mode specifically, players began to experience an issue if they entered the fight whilst in the /sit emote pose, which upon completion of the duty and returning to the game overworld, they would be kicked out of FF14 entirely, and unable to log back in due to an incompatibility that left their character in limbo. There were reports of this occurring with other emotes too, and at times totally randomly, though /sit was by far the biggest culprit. The victims were out of luck as well, because it would take until June 21st, 5 days later, for a hotfix to be applied that would allow them to log back into the game once again. The entire Ral Barn Savage debacle served as a lesson for the development team to be careful about bottlenecking the main scenario of an expansion with numerous early solo duties, and to more carefully consider the server demands and how players would interact with their game on an expansion release. Players eventually moved past it, completed the expansion, and this time fell into memory, and became a part of the game's player-built community lore. Its legacy, more than anything, was the queue system that we now have for instance servers, as a permanent measure to alleviate this from ever happening again. If there are any stories from FF14's past that you'd like me to talk about in future videos, please do let me know. More than that, if you're one of those players that got to queue up on Stormblood's release and experienced the first removed Savage encounter, I'd love to hear about your experiences in the comments section. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you made it all the way to the end, I really appreciate it. I have a Patreon. You don't need to support it, but if you do, it will allow me to keep uploading here more regularly. This video was available early to patrons, as well as pre-release excerpts and updates that go up there regularly, as well as occasional exclusive content, and you get included in the credits of future videos. The people on screen now are the reason I was able to make this one, and I'm greatly appreciative. No pressure though, and of course, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.